Hello, and welcome back to another episode of European Waterways Virtual Tours. This week, you find me in Scotland's dramatic Highlands at perhaps one of the most romantic castles, Cawdor. Best known for its literary connection to William Shakespeare's tragedy, Macbeth, this castle was set within beautiful gardens, and after more than 700 years in the same family, it remains the ancestral home of the Thanes of Cawdor. Anyway, I'm getting a bit wet here, so while I dry off, I'll let you discover this castle's remarkable past. Cawdor's castle immediately conjures up images of Shakespeare's 16th century tragedy Macbeth. There was a king named Macbeth who was king of Alba, but in the 11th century, and ruled over only a very small portion of the present country of Scotland. Moreover, King Macbeth had very little to do with Cawdor, though during his reign it was a thanedom. A thane was the equivalent to an English baron, long before the bard dramatised and completely rewrote the history of Scotland. A fort did stand in the thanedom, but stood approximately 1 mile from the current structure's site, and it is quite possible that Shakespeare had heard of this original castle. Nonetheless, the play is fictional, and though it is based on some historical accuracy, in reality, Cawdor has nothing to do with King Macbeth. In the 12th century, King Malcolm III granted lands at Cawdor to a French nobleman, Hugh de Cadella, in 1178 as gratitude for his help in restoring Malcolm's family to the throne after Macbeth had led an attack on his father, King Duncan, to claim the Scottish throne. Cadella supported the king by helping to kill Macbeth's successor, King Lulach, and Malcolm sought to have this loyal presence around him as he tried to control the untamed Highland clans. Malcolm's descendants ruled over Scotland until the late 13th century, and the Cadella's family name was anglicised to Cawdor, which subsequently evolved into the name Cawdor. Cawdor Castle is what is known as a tower house castle. The earliest of castles, whose design had arrived with the Norman conquest of Britain in 1066, were known as motte and bailey castles. A large mound was built, upon which a keep, or motte, was built, and below, a bailey, consisting of stables, barracks, and workshops, were defended by a simple wooden fence. As castles evolved, masonry succeeded wooden structures, and the castle keep rose up to 4 stories. Whereas in England it was common practice to surround the enclosure with a curtain wall and a moat, in Scotland the keep became the sole structure of the fortification and was heavily fortified with barbicans, portcullises and arrow slits. From the 15th century onwards, as manor houses were becoming more popular, castles too had to provide an adequate level of comfort for the nobility residing within them, and so tower houses were built, merging the line between a country house and a castle. Cawdor, as we see it today, dates to the 14th century, but it was strengthened several times over by the Scottish Crown since. In 1454, James II granted the 6th Thane of Cawdor, William Cawdor, permission to crenellate a tower, i.e. fortifying it with battlements, on condition that he be allowed to come and go as he pleased. According to legend, the Thane decided to build his new tower based upon a dream in which a donkey, laden with gold, laid down to rest under a small holly tree. When the Thane awoke from the dream, he selected the tree as the place where he should build his new tower. As we will see later, this tree still exists, and if anything, just adds to the tale. The Thane of Cawdor might have been better advised to choose the site for his castle without the aid of donkeys, however, for the low-lying site offered few military advantages. To compensate, the castle was surrounded by a wide moat and built with walls so thick that the castle's dungeon is built within the wall itself. After the Battle of Dalturroch in 1499, in which the clans of Cawdor and Campbell fought for ownership of a thanedom, the heiress of Cawdor, a young girl named Muriel, was kidnapped by the Campbells to be married into the clan. As she was being carried away, legend says that her mother bit off a joint from the child's little finger so that she could always be recognised. Muriel was later married to Sir John Campbell, which gave rise to a local tradition that the Campbells will always hold Cawdor if a red-haired woman lives on the shore of Loch Awe. Together, Muriel and John Campbell set about extending the castle in the style of their period. After Muriel's death in 1573, the thanedom and Cawdor Castle was left to her grandson, also named John Campbell, and further improvements on the castle were made during this time. By 1635, a garden had been added, and after the restoration of the monarchy in Scotland in 1660, Sir Hugh Campbell added or improved the north and west ranges, employing two known masons of the time, James and Robert Nicholson. Life for the Thanes of Cawdor was soon to be disrupted, however, for during the late 17th and into the 18th centuries, the Campbell clan were in support of the British Hanoverian government. In 1688, the glorious bloodless revolution saw the deposition of the Catholic King James II and VII of England, Scotland and Ireland by his daughter Mary and her husband William of Orange, forcing the Stuarts into exile in France. A year later, the Jacobite Rising, whose name derives from the Latin for James, Jacobus, of 1689, sought to restore the exiled House of Stuart to the throne. In March of that year, James returned and landed in Ireland in an attempt to regain his throne, and a small force of Highlanders were also recruited for a supporting campaign in Scotland. The continuing need to police the Highlands had used resources William needed for the 9 Years' War, and a peaceful Scotland was important, since the links between the Scottish and Irish branches of the MacDonalds meant unrest in one country often spilled over into the other. In 1691, the government offered an indemnity to all chiefs who should take an oath of allegiance before the start of the following year. Letters of fire and sword authorising savage attacks upon rebels were drawn up in anticipation of widespread refusals, but the chiefs took the oath. Alexander MacDonald of Glencoe postponed his submission until the last day of 1691, and was then unable to take his oath until January the 6th, as there was no magistrate to receive it. King William, Secretary of State for Scotland, thereupon issued an order under the King's signature for military punishment of the MacDonalds. More than 100 of Campbell's men, who had been amicably billeted with the MacDonalds for more than a week at Glencoe, suddenly attacked them. While many of the clan escaped, the chief, 33 men, 2 women and 2 children were killed. John Campbell, a neighbour and sworn enemy of the MacDonalds, was widely suspected of having planned the attack. Since neither Queen Mary nor her sister Anne had any surviving children, the 1701 Act of Settlement ensured a Protestant successor by rejecting Catholic heirs from the English and Irish thrones, and later that of Great Britain under the 1707 Act of the Union. When Queen Anne became the last Stuart monarch in 1702, her heir was but distantly related, but Protestant, Sophia of Hanover. Sophia unfortunately died 2 months before Anne in August 1714, and so her son became George I, and the pro-Hanoverian party controlled government for the next 30 years. As the Campbells were enemies of the Jacobite-supporting MacDonalds, especially after the events at Glencoe, they sided against them in supporting the English during the Jacobite Rising in 1715, in which King James VII of Scotland attempted to regain the throne once more. In 1745, his son, Charles Edward Stuart, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, once again tried to take the throne for the Stuarts for his father. Charles launched the rebellion at Glenfinnan in the Highlands and successfully captured Edinburgh in September, before heading to England after reassuring the Scots of substantial support of English Jacobites, and a simultaneous French landing in southern England. The British government called in for the support of more than 12,000 troops to deal with the rising, after the Jacobite invasion of England had reached as far as Derby. In fear of having their retreat cut off, and with a lack of support from English Jacobites, the Scots turned back. The Scottish and English sides eventually met on Culloden Moor in 1746, and the two sides had no other option than to fight in battle. Though the battle lasted only an hour, the Jacobites suffered heavy casualties and had to admit defeat to the English, and Culloden is known as being the last pitched battle fought on British soil. Though Jacobites remained in Scotland thereafter, the leadership took the decision to disperse, effectively ending the rising. After the Battle of Culloden, the Campbells thought it prudent to live on their Welsh estates in Pembrokeshire, which proved to be a blessing for Cawdor, for it meant that it was spared the Victorian improvements, and today remains a fascinating combination of an authentic medieval castle and a comfortable Jacobean house. We'll begin our tour here, outside the castle, since the rain seems to have taken a break for the time being. Scotland's weather can be quite temperamental, and so we have to make the most of the sunshine while we have it. Behind me, we have the drawbridge and the 15th century 4-storey tower house, one of the oldest parts of the castle. It would have originally been accessed by an external wooden stairway to the first floor, whose doorway was later converted into a window. The coat of arms, over the main entrance, contains some clues as to Cawdor's family history, and combines emblems of the Thanes of Cawdor, who have held on to the castle over the centuries. Beyond, you may just be able to make out a small lancet window which conceals a concealed room, where, legend has it, the 11th Lord Lovett is said to have hid for 3 days while outlawed for high treason in 1699. So, without further ado, let's make our way into the castle and start exploring. So after passing over the drawbridge and through the north courtyard, we've entered the castle and find ourselves here in what used to be the Great Hall. Now, as with any castle or stately home of a certain age, Cawdor is supposed to be haunted. 3 ghosts are known to walk its ancient corridors. A mysterious lady in blue, the ghost of Muriel's husband, Sir John Campbell, and a tragic young woman who committed suicide after being denied a forbidden love. And, in case you're wondering, no, there's never been a sighting of Macbeth's ghost, or indeed that of the 3 witches. Originally the Great Hall of the castle, the room we are in now, the drawing room, dates back to the 17th century after having been frequently remodelled. The last alteration was the addition of a splendid fireplace in 1684, embellished with the Cawdor family crest. At the opposite end of the room, behind you, is a minstrel's gallery, which is a hark back to the room's days as the Great Hall. After climbing a narrow staircase, we are in the Tapestry Bedroom. Directly above the Great Hall, it formed part of the 17th century additions of the castle, when it was remodelled from being a fortification into a family home. Behind me, you can see the 4-poster marriage bed made for Sir Hugh Campbell, the 15th Earl Campbell, and Lady Henrietta Stuart, who were married at the nearby Darnaway Castle in 1662 and features a richly decorated Venetian headboard. The tapestries that adorn the walls, after whom the room is named, are Flemish in origin, and are of a style known as arras hangings, and they depict predominantly biblical scenes, including Moses leading his people across the Red Sea. Woven from wool and silk, they were made specifically for the room in 1682 and are hung directly over the unpainted wall for warmth. Next door, the yellow room is peculiar since the fireplace is off-centre, the walls are not straight, and the windows are irregular. However, despite all of its faults, it makes for a very comfortable sitting room. Dispersed throughout the room are objects of interest and antiquity, and although we don't have time to go through all of them, I will point out just a few which are of particular interest. In the centre of the cabinet to my left is a Bronze Age funeral beaker, discovered during ploughing in the field in front of the castle in 1976. The long case clock dates from about 1680 and, just like in any good sitting room, the 18th century cupboard conceals a television set. Across yet another narrow corridor, and we are in what is known colloquially as the Woodcock Room. In part of a 17th century addition to the castle, this elegant room, which probably dates to about the 1670s, was intended for use as a sitting room. The beautiful Sheraton 4-poster bed, which you can see behind me, and the soft furnishings found throughout the room date from 1789. The room takes its family nickname from a painting of the game bird that hangs over the central doorway, although to generations of butlers the room was known as number 7, the number that came up on the bellboard downstairs. The old bell pulls were operated mechanically, and a tug on the bell cord pulled a zigzag of wires until they made their way down to the servants' quarters to summon, for example, hot water for a bath, or even breakfast and bed. Even more ornate is the pink bedroom, with not one, but 2 4-poster beds, this time by Chippendale. On the wall are tapestries depicting the story of Don Quixote, woven about 1680 and part of a set which continued downstairs in the family dining room. The blue tartan carpet was designed by the Cawdor family in 1991. We are now on the first floor of the old tower. Originally, the only entrance to the keep was at an arched doorway at the middle window, and access was via wooden steps that could be withdrawn in times of battle, meaning the only way a forced entry could be achieved was by scaling the battlements or by breaching the walls themselves, which would have been difficult since they are very, very thick. Once inside, an uninvited guest could be kept in a hidden dungeon below, whose trapdoor was located to the left of the fireplace. Later, the keep was altered and larger windows were installed, and the tower room, as it is known today, was furnished. To the right of the fireplace is a medieval privy, and in the winter the room is very warm, since the fireplace draws 63 feet from the hearth to the top of the chimney. Downstairs, this vault was once the ground floor guardroom of the tower and protected the approach to the drawbridge, and a secret dungeon is concealed in the thickness of the end wall. Cawdor Castle is the only castle in Britain built over a tree, and after radiocarbon dating, scientists have discovered that the tree in question is a holly tree, which was probably planted around 1372. The date of the tree tends to support expert opinion that this part of the castle was built in the last quarter of the 14th century. Another highlight is this, the family dining room, with an ornate fireplace which was installed in 1671, and the mantelpiece which commemorates the marriage of Sir John Campbell and Muriel Calder in 1510. The geometric design and the inscription, written in Dog Latin, have never been explained or translated and remain some of the many mysteries still to be deciphered in the castle. Cawdor was peculiar, since it never had a permanent kitchen in the castle itself, except for makeshift cooking arrangements for the garrison in the very top of the tower. The earliest kitchen was probably situated on the ground floor behind the Great Hall, in what is now the drawing room. In the 17th century, a large kitchen was installed in the basement below and was used for more than 300 years, right up until 1938. The modern kitchen we are in now was converted in 1971 from what used to be the schoolroom and features local larchwood panelling. The strange steel object on the worktop is not a thumbscrew, but a French Dutch press used to extract the gravy from meat. Now, it seems to be clearing up a little bit outside, so what do you say we go out and explore the grounds a bit? Once outside, we find ourselves in the grounds. Cawdor is set in wonderful gardens divided into distinct and very different parts. What is fascinating is that each of the 3 distinct gardens has its very own unique history and character. In addition, there is a large area of woodland directly behind the castle, known as the Big Wood. This woodland is all that remains of an ancient Caledonian pinewood forest and boasts some marvellous old trees with nature trails winding their way through them. Let's go and explore a little bit further. To the south of the castle is the Flower Garden, which was laid out around 1710 by Sir Archibald Campbell, the brother of the then Thane of Cawdor. Though his brother held the title, Sir Archibald actually managed all of the Campbell estates across Scotland and, after having studied in France, was influenced by the gardens he saw to create the formal layout of the gardens here at Cawdor. Though much has changed since Sir Archibald's time, the clipped yew hedges have survived, as have several of the fruit trees he planted. The 18th century design was enclosed by lavender borders in 1850, designed by Lady Cawdor. She also added the long herbaceous borders, which ensure colour well into the autumn. The walled garden is the oldest garden at Cawdor and may date to the 16th century or perhaps even earlier. There may have been an orchard here originally, but by the late 17th century it had been planted with a profusion of exotic plants. The section nearest the castle has been developed as a hedge maze inspired by the Minotaur labyrinth at Knossos in Crete. At the centre of the maze is a modern sculpture depicting the Minotaur. Laburnum arches surround the maze on three sides, creating a cascade of colour throughout the height of summer. Other sections of the garden include the knot garden, planted with aromatic herbs, and a hidden paradise garden protected by high yew hedges. Between the castle and Cawdor Burn is the semi-hidden wild garden, reached through a doorway in the flower garden wall. This delightful, informal area provides a stark contrast with the formality of the walled garden and the flower garden. Here, you will find profuse plantings of primulas, rhododendrons and azaleas, along with spring daffodils, bamboo clusters and willow trees. Among these familiar species, a rare plant native to Tibet as well. The wild garden leads into the big wood, 750 hectares of mature trees dissected by meandering trails. And there we have it. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of Cawdor Castle. It's starting to rain again now, so join me next week as we finish this series of virtual tours by heading back to France, to the capital of southern Burgundy in the beautiful city of Beaune, famous for its exquisite medieval hospital. I look forward to seeing you there.